So welcome, 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 our brilliant and beloved colleague, Yvon. We so appreciate your consistent visionary leadership and solidarity. It's been an incredible joy and pleasure working with you over the past many years as a board member of CCEDNet. And as always, it sets, we begin all things by giving thanks to our creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled, our compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Yvon, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work, sir?
Yeah, just a bit who I am. I'm living in Quebec City, but was born in Prince Edward Island in the Acadian community, in the French-speaking community. And there also was a small fishing village and a bit of agriculture, was self-sufficient. Everybody, all the fishermen had a cow and a land and so forth. There was, and it was fairly poor at that time. I remember that we got electricity when I was 12 years old in 1956. So when I see things in the third, some countries, I mean, this is not new for me. I've seen this previously, how the world is. It's just moving faster or slower in some continents, in some parts of the world. But there was a solidarity in that community, which helped them survive. And they survived through cooperatives. They had cooperatives for everything. Fishing, credit union. When I was young, the credit union was open 2 hours a week. So we'd go to the credit union. We had a cooperative store. And my father was buried in a funeral co-op, which he had helped found. And at that time also, that community was close to the Aboriginal peoples, First Nations, the Mi'kmaq people, which were friendly with the French Acadians because together they had struggled against the British colonizers. So in some way they had good relationships, and of course they were both Catholic also. So I mean that also was a factor of getting together and working together. But then I moved to university, and then I moved to teaching in Quebec City. But all those years I was involved in solidarity work with the poor neighborhoods in the city, the credit union, international solidarity. I studied political science. And we have one world and one humanity for me. So it's always been obvious that I see myself as a citizen of the world to start with. I mean, and when I see, even if I'm having a pension as a teacher, which we live in richer countries, which this is possible, with my friends in Mali or Senegal don't have that. I remember all this, and so my work and pension is paid by society. It's not only my work, because even people that pay taxes also for part of the pension plans and so forth. Anyway, all this to say that I've been involved in for over 20 years now. My career, a retired person, is almost as long as my teaching. I was 29 years in teaching, and that's my 26th year as a retired person. And I've been working as much as I did when I was teaching, because these small organizations we're involved in are don't have enough staff. We're not part of the 1%. So I mean, we have to do what we can and get moving to do many things, but we have done a lot of progress in the last 20 years. I've been involved in creating this international network, which is called RIPESS, International Network for the Promotion of Social Solidarity Economy. It was founded in 2022. There were Canadians at that event from the Chantier in Montreal, and the CCEDNet founder, Michael Lewis from British Columbia. They were at that meeting when they founded this network. And since then, been working to strengthen this network. And what's interesting here is that created this network of the grassroots. This is not a network of leaders of the cooperative movements or the big organizations. The grassroots. And so together, we created this network to be a spokesperson for the grassroots. And we have members in about 75 countries at least. And our difference is that we call ourselves intercontinental and not international. Not everybody understands the subtlety here, but the thing is that we have a decentralized network. So our leadership, our board of directors, it's half South, half North, and it's equal. Because most international NGOs are based in the North and are managed by the North, and the North fixes the programs and to work with and so forth. So we really a decentralized network. And right now our main chairperson is from Mali in Africa. I know this person for 20 years now. So, and we really, and this is why we're listened to, and we have respect from many organizations, including UN agencies. For example, we started working with International Labour Organization in 2009, because unemployment was getting very high with the economic and social crisis of 2008, 2009, with the subprimes in the USA and so forth. So our approach is creating jobs, but also helping people who are informal economy, or what they call also popular economy in some countries, create cooperatives, whatever. For example, probably most people know about the waste pickers, but in many countries they created cooperatives, like in Argentina and other countries. So they're moving to, because as long as people stay in the informal economy, there's a huge problem. Well, and so we were able to help influence positively International Labour Organization, who adopted the policy in 2022 on decent work and social side of the economy. And with ILO in Africa and Asia, we are developing contacts to move forward. This has been, for example, the African Union will be adopting in a couple of months a 10-year policy for SSE. So this is important progress. We have progress in Latin America also with the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, which is called ICLAC in English. So, and we're working with Asia also. So and as I've mentioned previously, we've been able to, together with UN agencies, other UN agencies that created a task force in 2013. There's people from the, besides ILO, there's the FAO is involved, others are involved, UNDP, United Nations Development Program, and so forth. So, and together with them, we're able to convince some countries to bring to the United Nations General Assembly a resolution recognizing SSE, which was adopted just a year ago, April 18th. There will be a webinar next week for the anniversary of this resolution. The resolution is interesting because it recognizes there's another way of doing the economy. So it's there are of course cooperatives as we know them, but and even for some of them we've lost a bit because they've been very big business. Sometimes they have billions and so forth. But the grassroots and like workers' cooperatives, but also many nonprofits now in many countries in the world have been created, and people do move because people sometimes they do this without knowing they're doing it because of necessity. People need to live, so they take initiatives in their small communities all over the world. There are many great examples I've met over time. So and this personally, I'm very glad to have contributed to this United Nations solution. I was a weaver in some way because I hadn't pushed. It might not have happened as fast. But this is networking. I mean, this is an ecosystem. We have the world economy, as we know now, has its own ecosystem with the World Economic Forum, the multinational corporations, the 1%. They have their universities. They fund the universities. They fund the think tanks, and they fund even Donald Trump. Anyway, this is the world we're living in, and our strength is not finance. Our strength is the people. So we gather people in other parts of countries, in different parts of the world, for example, in Canada, as you know, for example, the Inuit people in Canada, there are 60 communities, but 59 of the 60, the main economic unit is a cooperative. So, I mean, and this is linked to the community, but also linked to the values. For example, I've seen in India, and I've seen other parts of the world, people use the expression Mother Earth. We have to change our thinking. The world doesn't belong to us. We belong to the world, to the planet. I mean, we're the creation of that planet, because that we wouldn't live if we didn't have an ecosystem in our planet that permits people to live. You can't live on the moon. You can't live anyway. But our planet has brought this forward, and we have to respect this. Same thing with the First Nations in Canada. Remember, the president, the chair or president, whatever he calls it himself, of the First Nations Assembly of Quebec and Labrador, he had a nice saying on the radio program a couple years ago. There was a huge misunderstanding when the French arrived here. First was Jacques Cartier in 1534. He planted the French flag. Well, French there wasn't a flag of France, it was a flag of the king. Where was that then? The First Nations didn't understand that for the French, they were saying, we are taking over the land. It belongs to us now. We discovered, famous theory of discovery, which you might remember I prepared a resolution at AGM, CCEDNet AGM 2 years ago. So I said, because here, the First Nations, and it's still the case, never understood the concept of private property, of owning the land. Land belongs to the people, belongs to humanity. And so, this is why the First Nations Canada, and they say, when we think of development, we have to think of the 7th generation in the future. Because, I mean, we should improve the planet we're living in instead of destroying the planet we're living in by infinite growth. I'll always remember in 1974, there was an organization called the Club of Rome, which reported a report saying it's impossible to have infinite growth on a finite planet. So obvious, but capitalism, as we know it, needs infinite growth because capital needs to grow. And so this is the challenge we're living in, but more and more people understand that. And now with climate change, I mean, our communities and our fellow brothers and sisters in Africa or in other places, they're dying because of climate change. They're trying to move to northern countries, and they're trying to put borders to stop them from coming, walls and so I mean, all this is interlinked. So this is what it is interlinked. This is why we need to, unless we have an economy in Senegal or in Ghana or other places where people can have good lives, they will try to move to other continents, and they will die in the Mediterranean trying to cross over. Of course, besides the civil wars and everything else, besides extremism, which is present in all countries of the world, because people in power use this to stay in power. They use racism, they use everything to stay in power. So we're living in a world which is, even by an optimistic person, we're living in a world which has huge challenges. It's a long answer for a short question.
No, I couldn't agree more, but I know how much work you've done in the solidarity and social economies globally, the work that you've done with the United Nations, and even just hearing your journey from Prince Edward Island to Quebec, the concept of a funeral co-op, which is something that so many folks, I know a few folks that have developed similar frameworks. That journey once again speaks the breadth and scope of your work and the scale of your work. And I think it's really important to just reflect on the fact that you've built out intercontinental and national framework to support folks that are doing work in the social innovation, social impact space.
Yeah.
And I think what's really important also is that 7th generation thinking that you mentioned in terms of Indigenous communities across our remarkable nation. the fact remains that if we don't have that 7th-generation thinking framework in terms embedded in what we do, we're in trouble because we're always going to be seeing, we won't be able to see past our nose. So we're going to create policies, practices, procedures, and mental models that don't take into account leaving the world better for our ascendants, our children, and our children's children. So once again, I just really appreciate your candor, your leadership, and all the actionable insights you shared. My next question is, what's inspiring you right now? What has you curious, or what's keeping you up at nights?
First of all, I sleep quite well. So it doesn't really keep me up that much. But besides the positive things I mentioned and the negative things I mentioned, we are facing challenges within this movement because all of a sudden, about 2.5 years ago, the World Economic Forum, which is the think tank, let's say, of global economy, are starting to push social economy. Got me wondering, what's this about? And also they brought into their fold what is called social entrepreneurship. And they say they're the game changers and everything else. So in other words, from my point of view, there's an attempt to dilute the fundamental paradigm change we're talking about. It's like corporate social responsibility. Sometimes you can do a good job, but it all depends strictly on the will of the corporation. And they can say they'll do something else or whatever, and there's no obligation. I heard recently there was a country which had an obligation for CSR, 1% of their profits. This was in India. What they do is they create a small NGO and they fund it. In other words, they give it to their friends anyway, because not only it's voluntary, they decide who to give it to. And instead of paying taxes, which would be useful for, let's say, Global Affairs Canada or the programs to support people in the South, and the corporations and all. So I've understood this movement for a long time, and I even, for example, some of the global impact investing also is in some way decided in the North. I mean, the private finance taxes have been so low on the global finance. There's no inheritance tax anymore like there was about 50 years ago. So the accumulation of capital is so huge that they need to invest the capital. So there's the return on the capital. So, and one of the options they're using, even if they might have less interest, they do lend to people investing in the global South, but still, of course, the interest of the loans has to come back to the North. But more than that, the needs, they will invest. So it gets people in the South to try and find a way of creating business that they can get the impact investors. Not necessarily what the community needs, but they can come up with a good job for doing this and whatever. So there are traps. I mean, there are some of them, those people are doing very good. I mean, they're sincere. They want to help people. And for example, employing handicapped people in a restaurant or whatever. I mean, there are good things. However, when you look deep in this, what they say, when they look deep, that they don't talk about what causes poverty. I'll give you one quote in the paper I'll be sending soon. This bishop from Brazil, what, 30 years ago, he had this saying, when I help the poor, people say I'm a saint. When I ask why are they poor, they call me a communist. In other words, you never can discuss the root causes. And then that gives us the other ideology, I'd say, when you bring up those questions, when people say, you can't do anything about that. This is a system we're living in. It's too big. We can't change it. So let's try to improve a bit or patch things or the worst things. But in humanity, when you think about it in a deeper sense, we can't imagine that humanity can achieve what it wants for better lives for people in all countries of the world if capital is the key factor. I'm not saying it. The system is saying it. The system is not. I mean, I'm not. We can't even criticize the capitalist, because if the capitalist decides, I'm going to pay better wages for my workers, he'll disappear. The system forces everybody to do the same thing, lower the costs, don't pay for, and everything else, and pay less taxes. And I have a friend in the Philippines some years ago saying, the way it works is that there's a race to the bottom. In other words, communities in different parts of the world, or in Canada, have to offer the best conditions to attract a corporation. Lower wages, less unions. They use this to convince the corporations to come. You might remember a few years ago when Amazon put out an appeal. I said, we want proposals to create a new hub in North America, big hub of, let's say, $10 billion, whatever, with 5,000 jobs, so forth. So each municipality in Canada or in the US, like I say, Toronto, the big cities, the small cities can't do this, New York or whatever. And they were promising Amazon the best conditions, meaning this is where you make most profits. And so tax breaks for some years, everything else, property taxes lower. So this is the way the system is working. We can't compete directly with that system, so we have to build something different, build local economies where the surplus produced by our activities in a co-op or grocery or whatever, needs to stay in the community. And this is why people recognize that this is one way of this. In reality, there's no other way. I mean, the sixth richest men, because there are no women in that group, the GAFA group.
Yeah, Bernard Arnault, I think, is one of them.
Yeah, and the one with Bezos with Amazon, and so I mean, their increase in during the COVID was something like $800 billion. This is bigger than every increase in wealth in all the southern continents. And now they can, like Elon Musk, he can position himself to own social media, which he can say anything, and he can, and I mean, and they don't struggle against racism or whatever else on that platform. Anyway, this is I won't go into this because it will be a too long comment, but this reminds me of a University of Toronto professor about 34 years ago. He published a document called "The Medium is the Message." In other words, McLuhan.
Yeah.
In other words, our societies are changing, not only with the content which is published, but kids 6, 7, 8 years old have to take hours and they're influenced by all this. Anyway, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not an expert on this, but some people in the media and CBC and others say that we have to really think about this, what will happen to our world. And people don't look to the media where there are professional journalists anymore. And so anything goes by, and media has a very tough times to survive. By the way, I don't know if it's known as much in the rest of Canada, but in Quebec now, the main newspapers are nonprofits or cooperatives. My local newspaper here dates back to 1917 or so. There were There's one, there was one in Sherbrooke, one in Ottawa, one in anyway, there were 6. Now they all cooperatives. The company went bankrupt, and they bought the 6, and now most media here in Quebec are nonprofits and are cooperatives. So, and they surviving because people in the community will, individuals like myself will lend or invest in the cooperative. We won't. Nobody in the community will support a corporation that has a newspaper. Anyway, these are ways of keeping some sort of professionalism in this field. Very tough, very, very tough, because they're doing everything against the Canadian law. We're trying to force Facebook and others to compensate for their billions. It's like a giant, I don't know if it's a word in English, siphon, you know.
Yeah, they're siphoning
Everything.
One of my greatest frustrations a lot of times is, it goes back to that quote that you said. The bishop said, you know, when I help those that are impoverished, I'm called a saint. When I speak about the reasons they're in poverty, they call me a communist or socialist. I think that sentiments of the pushback is always the same argument, same rhetoric. Capitalism is the best system because it's raised more people globally out of poverty.
No.
And I think that argument is stale and dated for so many reasons. Because when you look at the obscene amounts of hoarding of capital by individuals, by institutions, by countries, by regions of the world, and the extractive natures that wealth is accumulated. Usually when wealth is accumulated in obscene ways, there's always some form of human or planetary extraction. It's either stolen land or free labor. There's almost a sentiment that's, you know, like, well, you know, the folks that are wealthy are just smarter than everyone else. That could be true, definitely. But if you're so smart, why not create a world that's better for your children? If you're so smart, why not create a business or companies that actually help the planets and people thrive? Because that's what, and I think maybe there's a distinction between intelligence and wisdom. But I couldn't agree more that the dominant narrative that we see in terms of economic development is the need for more and maximalism and growth and scale. And if you're not growing and scaling, you're dying. And I think that's scary, because I just saw a stat this morning that scared me. Every 100 days, so the US government has $34 trillion in debts. And every 100 days, the interest goes up by $1 trillion. Can you imagine that? Like, when I was younger, the word trillion was never used in conversation of economics. Right now, the word trillion is thrown out there, and it shows the times that we're in, where countries' interest payments on their debt is larger than the GDP of other countries. So it's just a vile and very demonic type of economic development that we're seeing globally in various regions. But once again, that's why I really appreciate leaders like yourself that have been able to walk the walk and talk the talk, being able to journey from Prince Edward Island to Quebec, being able to have that narrative, that story about your father building a funeral co-op. Those are the things that intrigue me. Those are the things that I work on the side of my desk when I'm not working. Literally, I had a meeting with some elders about that in Central Region, West Africa, recently for a community that I'm working in. So I'm saying, I'll say that your journey speaks to a journey of many that want to see change in terms of how economic development is done, want to see life-affirming economics or economies, as opposed to these extractive capital markets that are ultimately finding ways to terminate us as a species. So once again, I just appreciate your character and leadership. So my next question, what challenges and barriers do you face in your work? And what are some of the approaches you and your colleagues are taking to overcome some of these challenges and barriers?
The hugest challenge we have as an international network, Intercontinental Network, is resources. We've done all this for 20 years at the global level with one or 1.5 staff. Because the way our development system is working, even those who are good, like Canadian co-ops or other NGOs that work with the Global South. They work on with funding from the government most times, plus charity from people. You can deduct your income tax on what you give to help people in the Global South. But the way the programs are designed by the governments, and they're forced to align themselves with those programs, is that you need immediate results. How many jobs have you created? How many, so forth. How many housing units have you created? How many health clinics? But nobody is interested in funding the intermediary level that supports all this, that gathers this together. So an impact on policy in countries. This is why in some countries, some have been able to do it, like in Mali. So they got the government to adopt legislation on or policies on the economy. But it's very, very, very tough because it's gradually we're hoping to have more. We need, let's say, I mean, this year we have a budget of 100,000 euros. This is 130 Canadian dollars. We can't even have board meetings in person anymore. But gladly, we have Zoom and other tools, and we do have strong ties. Sometimes there are meetings where some of our members can come. For example, there's an important meeting in Malaysia in January where most of my friends in Asia were able to attend. So they got funding from the government in Malaysia. There are funding for sometimes for meetings, it's possible to get the funding. But for the core work of websites, organizing meetings, organizing programs, organizing funding applications and so forth, is very, very tough. And of course, and our movements, like in Canada with CCEDNet, or US with New Kind of Coalition, and same thing in other countries, our networks in our countries are there to serve their members in our countries also. We are not there as international organizations. We are members of international organizations, but our fundamental role is to support our own members in our own communities in our own country. So the support that can be given is very small. Sorry, because unlike some of the big cooperatives, they have some capacity, but even then, some of the big cooperatives don't like to talk much about the system change we're living in. Except the workers' co-ops in general are very aligned to this. But some of the larger co-ops, which have billions of dollars in sales every year, well, at least they belong to people in their country or in their province. But sometimes they've lost their fundamental values, and they've forgotten why they were created at the beginning. At least, even if the big ones in Canada, like Saskatchewan and other Quebec and others, some of them have even abandoned their name co-op with their names. They were created to struggle against the corporations. But today, and they have part of the market in Quebec, for example, province, 80% of the milk you can buy in supermarkets is on the market by cooperatives. And they do support a little bit. At least it belongs to people here. They could change. They could be improved on the way they work, but they are facing tough challenges because they are facing the capitalist market. If they don't have same prices, if they can't, they need to compete, and they're caught in a trap also, and for sure. This is why even it's tiny, this is why there are food markets in different cities with local farmers. This is why the community supports agriculture. This is why they're organic and so forth. But even then, it can be a trap. For example, I was in Japan in 2009, the conference, there was this minister who saying, we support strongly organic, but out of 240,000 tons of organic, which consumed in Japan each year, 65% is imported. So he said the mileage impact is not calculated. This impact on global warming is not concerned. So you have to consume organic, yes, but you have to also you have to consume locally and seasonally, because in countries like Canada, we need to adapt. Now something I didn't have when we were young. I can have a banana every morning or every day. I can have a juice. I can have a banana, oranges, whatever. When I was young, we didn't have that. So our diet was adapted to the seasons. And I remember reading some years ago a book called Food Inc. by Bill McKinnon, or whatever, I don't remember his name exactly, in the US, saying the reason the state of New Jersey is called a garden state because it used to be a garden for New York City. But now I can buy apples at the market right here, but 5 minutes walk from where I live, with apples from Washington State, apples from South Africa, and all else. This is foolish. It's completely something absurd for the planet. And so this is the way I mean, I remember some years ago, because they're also, I mean, we can't attack everything. We can't do everything. This is why there are many other, that's why also I'm somewhat optimistic. There are many social movements that have been over the last 20 years. So society has become stronger all over the world, in Europe and so forth. And they work on all these issues. Like, for example, we just joined recently, the International Labour Organization just launched a Global Alliance for Social Justice. This is part of it. There are many, there's this, some UN agencies have what they've called social protection floors. So there needs to be, there's a lot of movement to create alternatives, even if it's complicated and tough. But this is why I mean, this is another challenge, that all these alternative movements, this is more than circular economy. This is the whole vision of the world we have to change. And as you mentioned some minutes ago, capitalism did bring good things, and some were bright and some were not. Like, for example, Donald Trump, he got rich because his father gave him $10 million. Otherwise, nobody would hear about Donald Trump. And most of these, not all, but most of these people who own the economy got it from inheritance. So this is not because and it's not true that people are have equal opportunities in their lives. If you're a child of one of these rich people, you have a better chance in life than if you were born in a slum in Rio de Janeiro, for sure. I mean, this is and yes, as you say, people say capitalism did bring good things, but also let's put it this way. This is one argument they use. There's another big argument they're using. When they had no more arguments, at the end they will say, we don't have any choice. Otherwise, it's South Korea, North Korea, or China. And this is the ultimate argument. They agree it's a bad system we're living in, but we don't have any choice. That's the ultimate argument. Ideology works hard.
It does.
And I'm like, because the thing is, the reason we say this in network that we are against, alternative against the capitalist managed economy, not the private businesses, but capitalists make a difference. 90% of all the small businesses in the world are not capitalist businesses. People work 70 hours a week to survive, even the small shops in different cities and so forth. global south, the same people are just how, so they are exploited as much as anybody else by the system because they have to buy everything they, so anyway, so this is, so anyway, this is one of the arguments that's used. But what I want to say here, and we also say we're against the socialism as it was with Soviet Union. In both cases, the people are not, it's not democratic economy. We live in an economy which managed by the state or a capitalist, and we need a people managed economy. People are we living in a generation now where people have gone to school, even in southern countries in many places, not all, but many countries. We're living, 90% of scientific knowledge has been, and scientists less than 100 years old. And we now have the capacity to organize the world differently. We have the capacity to climate change. We have capacity to do everything. The knowledge is all there. But the system is jamming and blocking this. This is why sometimes it might not take that much to have things change. We're living in a system now, in an era now where it's the right-wing neoconservative agenda is really pushing hard. Next time in France, it'll be probably the right wing again. US, we don't know yet. Canada, well, it looks like the conservatives, which are very conservative, which are really conservatives, much more than the progressive conservatives we had 20 years ago. In Argentina, they elected a extremely right-wing person recently. Anyway, it's just tough times because this is like the 1930s, and I remember reading enough about this. This is how also fascism came to play in Germany. It was against the capitalists that Hitler talked about, against, and it was also saying the capitalists were on, the big capitalists were on, sometimes were often the Jewish ownership and so forth. They were rich, etc. So, and this is, and he was able to, like Trump, he was able to get his shock troops, his troops from the poorest people. And this is where Trump is getting his support. His poorest white people who are exploited by the system, but they think it's, so he's giving the speeches and everything else to keep in power. He's manipulating the less educated people. The same thing with Bolsonaro when who was president in Brazil and other parts of the world. I mean, and all the funding comes from this corporations from the very ultra right wing. I mean, the Koch brothers in Texas, I think it was, they gave minimum $100 million a year to the Republicans, maybe more, and they own so much. They have so much money. They can just, I mean, it has influence on media and everything else. So it is tough times, but people are resisting, and I've been able to go to different meetings in the U.S., like in communities which have had big problems, like Buffalo, New York, or St. Louis, Missouri. I mean, the Afro-American communities are organizing around solidarity economy a lot. So this is a way of working. I've been able to meet and 3 times people from Corporation Jackson in Mississippi, great leaders of inspiring leaders for the young people in the U.S. and inspiring people in the Afro-American communities. In the U.S. also, we don't hear as much about them, but also some of this corporate movement also they don't use the word First Nations in the U.S. They use Afro-American, Indians or whatever, but in some places they use cooperatives, a lot like in the West. But it's tough also because it's a different situation in Canada. Like in Canada, we don't. the US never had, I don't think it will happen. I talked to this some Americans. I said, no way. I said, you should have a reconciliation and Truth Commission like we had in Canada or South Africa did. No way in US. I mean, some have talked about this, but no way the American system now will do this with the Afro-Americans or with the Aboriginal peoples either. I mean, this is, and I mean, you have enough experience, you have long experience like myself. We do know that this living system we're living in has been in some way led by the US, clearly. What was called, we don't use the word expression much anymore, but I don't even hear it anymore. In the 1960s, the expression that was used was WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. This was the key to the US, and because they had accepted people from the United Kingdom who were different religious organizations and so forth. Even some people, Protestants from France, went to the US colonies because they couldn't come to Quebec, because here you had to be Catholic when you came to Quebec during those years. So it became, they in some way brought in people from all over the world, even Ireland, but it was tough for the Irish because they were Catholic. I remember very well when Joseph Kennedy was elected, John Kennedy was elected president. He was the first Catholic to be elected president of the US. They were saying it's impossible for Catholic to be elected president of the US. They were saying that for a long time, but he was able to get elected. I mean, things like that happened. But and Obama was elected. I mean, there's been some progress, clearly, but things are rolling backwards, especially if Trump is elected again. It'll be foolish. It'd be, I mean, I don't know what will happen. I mean, it's going to be extremely bad because finally, I don't think he will be elected, but I mean, it's still possible. So, and we saw what happened when he'll be dumping Ukraine, he'll be dumping everything else, and become friendly again with China and Putin. So, I mean, this is really, yeah, this is in some way
immense.
Yeah.
No way to even.
But I mean, humanity will prevail. It will be long. But I mean, there's no way of people saying this is the best way to work and so forth. I mean, like what's happening in Gaza now. Even if Israel crushes the military, there'll be more. I mean, those that were killed, the children will pick up arms again or whatever. I mean, you can't just crush the people. And this started in 1948. I mean, and they
so much work to do in terms of healing and reconciliation across so many jurisdictions, so many regions, and just the changing of mindsets, as you mentioned, like the Kennedys. Like I remember there was a book, I think the author's name was Noel Ignatieff or something like that. He wrote a book called When the Irish Became Whites. And it's such an insightful book because it speaks to the misnomer of whiteness, because even if you get a law dictionary, white just means that you're a landowner. So by definition, if you get a legal dictionary, and auspicious enough, the biggest legal dictionary is called the Black's Law Dictionary. But if you get a Black's Law Dictionary and you Google what white means is a misnomer for literally you're a landowner. I've never met a white person in my life. I've met Europeans, I've met Caucasians, you know what I mean? And same thing, my beard is black. I'm a person of African descent. There is no black land on the planet. There's no trees with black cultures or black communities. So we use these misnomers loosely a lot of times to identify people. And they're usually misnomers that associate people to a class and a system that's structured in a way that usually finds ultimately a way to extract from them or extract their intellectual property or steal their land or their labor. So once again, like I couldn't agree more with you in terms of just some of the calamities around some of the populist right-wing movements around the planet. And I think the rise of these populists or the rise of far-right movements, I think once again speaks to the weakness and the unfortunate leadership of the far left. Like we need like So there's always a countervailing force. Like it took a certain type of leadership to create a Barack Obama and a Trump, or in Canada, Steve Harper, or Justin Trudeau. Like there's always this the swinging of the pendulum around red and blue in Canada and the States, the liberals and Democrats. Liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats. But once again, I think it comes down to us finding ways and means to create just economies, make sure that we can local economies that are thriving and flourishing, make sure we find ways and means to honor people, and ultimately create a sense of belonging through pillars of justice, access, inclusion, diversity, decolonization, equity. And once we can find ways and means to sustain the institutions, organizations like RIPESS, an intercontinental organizations doing work for decades, and like others, we'll be in a better place. But until then, it's a lonely journey for those that are fighting in the social justice space, internationally or domestically. So my last question to you, Yvon, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and our viewers?
Individuals can play an important role, but individuals without a movement will not go nowhere. This reminds me of an African, can't find my English word. Anyway, it says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this is the only way. And so this is why we have to continue to create a sense of a community, working together. And the solution is not the individual who gets rich or whatever. This is tough because the dominant ideology is individualism and everything else. Even Thatcher some years ago said, there's no such thing as society, it's families. I mean, this is really not easy to work with people like that. So in other words, so the dominant ideology, we have to debunk those notions. And there's I'm hoping it comes in English, there was a book published in Montreal two years ago called Debunking, English translation of the title here, Debunking 20 Myths about Capitalism, and a subtitle, An Ecology for the 99%. And so, I mean, there's no scientific proof that the system we're living in will solve the problems, but it's impossible to. Proof that we have goes in the opposite direction. So we have to, the whole question of ideology is strong. And those that have the power, they can fund think tanks, they can fund newspapers, they can fund everything. So we have to every day tell people, no, just like climate change, at least that scientific proof now is accepted by at least 99% of the population. That's almost, except that even if they accept that it's driven by the economy, by human-made problems, but they will not do anything. Of course, even the conservatives now they against the carbon tax or whatever else. And they're doing it because it's not good for their friends who have owned the big businesses and so forth. But even then, there are more and more youth, but we really have to, it's not easy. Really understand that young people, some are discouraged. So we have to also, my friend I mentioned earlier, who was in British Columbia, said we have to resist and build. So I'd say that would be I'm in both, but I'm working a lot on the build alternatives. But as you say, the left wing, 30 or 40 years ago, I was in those movements. We were saying we take a revolution and take power, but we didn't realize it was impossible. And because I'm not a Marxist really, but there was a Marxist idea saying that the politics of society are what do you call it? losing my words in English here. It's theology is a production, is a system, political system, right? Is a production is produced by the economic system of the region, so it corresponds. So, in other words, like the capitalist system didn't come about because of a revolution. It came about by organizing their own economy and gradually got rich and took over. It'll be the same thing here. It's impossible to take over by a revolution. Revolution being armed revolution or whatever else. It's impossible. And this is where the left wing made its I'd say it's huge mistake. They did try to take power, and they were China or whatever, Russia, Soviet Union. In fact, like in China now, it's become a capitalist economy also. So I mean, this is the challenge of thinking and building along, and gradually building your own system and reaching out to others. And there are many, and this is what's encouraging, is that what I'm talking about here, it's people are doing it even without knowing it often in all parts of the world, and gradually is building this movement. And
yeah,
this is,
I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is just how resilient these systems are, because at the end of the day, the only way you change a system is if people are actually tired, exhausted of the system. But if some of the poorest people on the planet still aspire to be a billionaire, if there's still that yearning to have, then the haves will always exist and the have-nots will always exist. Till there's a mental shift of abundance and solidarity and economies that are based off of local frameworks. I don't want to use the word meritocracy because sometimes that gets prescribed to the right wing or to Republicans or conservatives, but localized systems that are based off of merits and value. But making sure that everyone has a value, but everyone's contribute. Because that's what solidarity is, where you recognize, you come together and build. We say Ubuntu, I am because we are. But if some of the poorest people in every community still aspire to be a billionaire, then we're always going to be in trouble as a species. Or
buy a lottery ticket.
There you go. There you go. So I know we could probably go on. Me and you can do a long form Joe Rogan style for 4 to 6 hours, but obviously that's not what we saw today. So I really appreciate your leadership, your tenacity, and your consistent candor. It's always a pleasure to connect with you, our beloved colleague. And I love that what you mentioned earlier. You said there's no such thing as society. It's families. And I think when we go back to that point, of just going back, like forget this abstract notion, but just the fact that we can do so much as individuals, as families, as communities, that we need to stop thinking from a perspective of defeatism, thinking of a perspective of scarcity. There's more than enough abundance, resources, tools, intellectual property to be able to drive innovation and change the systems that we've been trying to change since time immemorial. But we have to get to work and we have to keep resisting and keep building. So once again, thank you, Ron, for all that you're doing, all that you stand for. And as always at CCEDNet, we close the way we began this conversation, this interview, by giving thanks to original stewards, the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled, for compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you, Yvon. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much.